Welcome. Thanks for joining Inputs to Action. I'm Dr. Lisa Toppin and excited to have you join the conversation today. We are featuring Andy Storch. He is author, speaker, connector, consultant, and we're going to dive into all of the work he's doing around talent and learning. He's got a brilliant book available. Own Your Career, Own Your Life. You see the poster there in the background. I love the placement, Andy. That's perfect. And so welcome. Thank you for taking some time with us.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm honored to be here. I appreciate it. It's been great getting to know you recently over our multiple conversations, and I'm excited to be talking with you here today.
Yes, well, I figured turnabout is fair play because you hosted me on your podcast, and
That's
I
right.
thought, well, I want some of this action here too for
Right.
action. So I'm delighted and honored to have you. I was honored to be on your podcast, and happy you're joining here. So let's get into it. Tell us about you and your work and all that you're doing in the learning and development space.
Yeah, well, thank you, Lisa, again. And it was wonderful to have you on my podcast, The Talent Development Hot Seat, where we talked about the intersection of talent development and diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI, two things that I'm very passionate about. And the work I do spans across the talent development space and career development space. So on one side, I have the podcast that we mentioned, The Talent Development Hot Seat. And I run a membership community for talent development professionals called the Talent Development Think Tank. It's actually a conference and a community. We're starting to plan the next conference that is going to be coming up in early 2023. And on the career development side, I work with organizations to help them improve engagement and retention by teaching their people to own their careers so that they are more intentional with what they're doing. They're likely to have more conversations with their managers, and of course, they're likely to stay longer with the organizations. And I do that through the book that I have, Own Your Career, Own Your Life. I also do a lot of speaking, and I have a training program as well.
You're busy, but I love that you have sort of anchored in this career space, because I think you're right. I think some of the secret sauce to engagement is this whole conversation about career. So take us inside your thoughts about it. Why did you decide to focus on career from your perspective?
Well, I have, I've had my own career that's been meandered all over the place, right? I've tried different things. I got into entrepreneurship for a while, and then I went into corporate and worked in the insurance industry. And then I got into consulting and got a chance to work with some large companies running workshops all over the world. And I learned a lot about business and leadership and finance and what makes things successful. I have an MBA, all that sort of stuff. And I also observed a lot of people kind of drifting through their careers, operating in reaction mode, sort of waiting for other people to tell them what to do, where to go, waiting for their manager or their boss to give them an opportunity. And it's not that these people couldn't be quote unquote successful, right? Because a lot of people continue to move up the ladder. But I think a lot of times people sort of wake up and wonder, like, what the heck happened the last 20 years? What am I doing? Am I on the right track? Do I really like the work that I'm doing? And so I kept that in the back of my head as I was going through my own journey. And going back to 2016, I started getting really into personal development after I read a book called The Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod, which is sort of all about taking control of your morning, getting up an hour earlier than you need to be really intentional with morning activities by doing things like meditation, reading, writing, journaling, exercise, that sort of stuff. And that really changed my life. And I started, I went on my own journey of reflection and self-awareness and growth and personal development, and started reading a lot of books and listening to podcasts, and felt myself really drawn back towards this area of entrepreneurship. Even though there had been no entrepreneurs in my family, my parents were teachers and I didn't even know what that was growing up. It's something that really compelled me and was pulling me in. And so as I was going on the journey to find out how can I sort of leave the corporate world to go run my own business, and I was hiring coaches and joining mastermind groups and going to conferences and reading books and all this sort of stuff, I learned a ton of things about how to go about achieving, this sort of career goal that you have, whatever it may be. And I had this realization sometime in 2019 when I got the idea for the book, and I was having conversations with clients. Because I would listen to all these podcasts, and I would hear sometimes you hear these messages like, well, if you don't like your job. You need to quit the 9 to 5 and start your own business, right?
Mm.
And I would talk to clients and people in the corporate world and realize that most people don't want to be running their own business. They like
Right.
working for a big company. They like being part of something bigger. They like the security of a paycheck, whatever it may be. And they don't want to be unhappy, right? What most people, almost all people want is they want to feel fulfilled in their careers and they want to feel happy in their lives. And I felt like with all of the things that I had learned and done, I had an opportunity to give that to people, to give people a guidebook or roadmap on how they can not only create a career that's more fulfilling for them now, but also set themselves up for future success by doing things like networking and building their personal brand. And so that's why I put that book together. And the timing sort of worked out well with the Great Resignation or Great Reset, whatever
Mhm.
you may call it, where
Mhm.
sort of the power in the hiring versus being hired market really shifted towards the employee, right? There's such a demand for good labor, and people really started, I think, the COVID pandemic, it was hard for many people, myself included, but it caused a lot of people to kind of step back and ask themselves some questions and do some reflecting they never did before and think about what they really want in their career. And therefore, a lot of companies had to do the same and say, are we providing what our people want to keep our best people? And that's where I've now created an opportunity to come in and work with companies to really help them provide more of what they need to give to their employees so that they can keep their best people and
Yeah.
continue to grow and thrive.
Yeah, no, you're right. You hit it at exactly the right point because companies really have struggled over the last, I'm going to say 18 months with
Hmm.
this reshuffle and the great resignation. Now, do you get a sense that there is a slowdown with regard to that? We've been talking about sort of the inflation, the efforts to sort of cool
Yeah,
markets, bring that down, and that's certainly going to impact labor markets. They're going to be fewer positions and companies
right.
are going to slow hiring. Are you starting to see some of the edges of that?
Well, it's really interesting because when you look at, and I kind of follow what's going on with the economy and the stock market and the job market and things like that. And we're in this almost like unprecedented space or position where there are many signs that show the economy has been slowing, that we might be in a recession. There are many companies that are struggling right now, especially in the retail space, as consumers pull back. Inflation has been a big challenge, and yet unemployment is still near all-time low. There
Mhm.
are, open roles, more open roles than people out there, especially in, white collar, educated type positions. And it's still a challenge to get the best people and keep the best people. Now, I think we're probably going to start to see a slowdown in people who are, taking that risk or just
Mm,
leaving their company on a whim to go
yeah.
try and find a job somewhere else, right? Because the frenzy might be slowing down.
Mhm.
But I think, for our most talented workers, they're going to be high in demand anywhere.
Yep.
And, I don't think companies can really like sit back and think, okay, whoever we have now, we've got them in place. They've got to be doing everything they can to help people really feel like they're growing in their careers, they're developing, that their work matters. There's opportunities for to do different things. And then you also have to account for the fact that, we've got younger millennials and Gen Z now
Mhm.
coming into the workplace, and they have sort of different wants and likes. And if you really look at Gen Z, looking for a little bit more autonomy, like this idea of
Mhm.
remote first is and flexible work, like setup is more, attractive. And then the number one thing that people want really across all age groups, but I think it's really coming out with the younger generations is growth. They want to know, how am I going, if
Mm,
I take this job, how am I going to grow in my career? Right.
mhm.
And so if you don't have an answer for that, then all the money in the world is not going to matter. And then, I think aside from that too is like, what is the culture like?
Mhm.
And I mean, Lisa, from your work probably better than I do, that you have these younger generations asking questions about the culture and DEI and, is it an inclusive culture and that sort of stuff that people before were not asking about. And
Yep.
so companies need to pay attention to all of these things.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm interested in your thoughts around growth in particular because
Hmm.
there's there's a little bit of a tension that I think exists in some of that. There is the, as you say, own your career,
Yep.
right? And
Yep.
so you want the growth, and but
Mm-hmm.
you're sitting in the context of an organization, and so you're asking questions about what will the organization provide for me
Mm-hmm.
with
That's right.
regard to growth. So there's a
Yep.
little bit of a tension there.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about what do you say to employers about what
Yeah.
to do about that? And what are you saying? I kind of know what you're saying to employees
Yeah.
in terms of own the career, but
Yeah.
how do you reconcile that?
Yeah, so there's it's sort of like a meet me halfway situation, right? There's responsibility on all sides. And I actually really see three pillars when it comes to successful career growth and development and people being happy and fulfilled in their careers. There are three important components. Number one is organizations need to provide the tools, the pathways, the resources that are going to allow people to grow in their careers. What does that look like? It could be obviously learning platforms, LinkedIn Learning or Udemy, or like, here's some courses and programs that you could take to help you improve. What does it look like? How easy is it to move around and find other positions in the company?
Mhm, mhm.
Do you make that available? Is there a clear path or map or route, for people to be able to move up or move around and gain different experiences? So that's very important. Companies need to provide that. But they can also provide that stuff all day long. And if people don't take advantage of it, it's not going to matter, right? So that's
That's
step one. The second pillar is managers, right? We need
right.
managers to provide the coaching, the guidance, and really having those conversations with their people and supporting them in
Mhm,
achieving the goals that they want to achieve in their career. And that really means, I've done a lot of study on leadership. I've run a lot of leadership development workshops. I truly see the role of a leader, of a manager, is essentially to enable and empower their people to achieve their goals, whether it be
mhm,
getting
mhm,
their job done in the workplace, as
mhm.
well as achieving their bigger career goals, even if that means leaving your team, right, and going
Right,
on and doing
right,
something else, or even leaving the company.
right.
Your job as a leader is to support them. And I do believe that the more you do that, put your ego aside and support your people, the more it's going to pay off for you in the end in terms of reputation, legacy, other people wanting to work for you, that sort of thing. And then the third pillar are the employees themselves. They need to take ownership of their career. So you've got to take
Mhm,
responsibility, right, for
mhm,
your
mhm.
own career and where you want to go. Stop waiting, stop drifting, stop blaming your manager and your company and other people for things not working out for you, but take responsibility in every situation for, okay, I'm responsible for this. I'm going to figure out where I want to go, get to know yourself, gain clarity on your vision for where you want to go in your career, work that out, put some clear goals in place, and then go proactively, have a conversation with your manager, find a mentor who can help you, take advantage of those tools and resources, because it's great that the company has LinkedIn Learning or whatever, and there's all these courses out there. If you're not doing them, you're not taking advantage of them, then it doesn't benefit you at all, right? You've got to make the time, put it on your schedule, and be proactive in having that conversation, because I think there's also friction. Maybe it's not even friction, but there's a big disconnect right now in the workplace where managers are open to and happy to help their people. They just
Mhm.
don't know what they want. And a lot of times we figure, well, I haven't heard from them, so they're probably fine, right?
Right.
Meanwhile, employees are sitting there getting frustrated, feeling like, nothing's coming my way. I'm going to go on LinkedIn and look around for something else.
Yeah.
If you, and the manager's really busy, they've got a lot of stuff going on, right? So if the employee would just go to the manager and say, hey, we haven't had a career conversation in a while. Can I schedule time with you to just talk about my career and where I'm going? I just want to check in with your thoughts on like the market and our company and this role and this project, et cetera, and go have that conversation. They're probably open to supporting you. They may not be, right? There are managers out there, unfortunately, that are closed off to that sort of stuff. And at least if that's the case, you find out
Right.
and you're able to move on, right? I did that early in my career. I went to my manager, and said, "Hey, I'm doing this job now. I don't think it really fits my strengths. I think I'm more of a people person. I'd like to spend more time in the field doing this over here." And he basically said, "No, get back to work." Right. And I was like, okay, well, that didn't work out very well. And that's when I knew I needed to leave. And
Yeah.
so I'm grateful that happened, because it set me on the path to get me to where I am today. But I like to share that story because, especially for companies, because if that manager had said to me like, "Oh yeah, let's figure out a way to harness your strengths and put a new role together for you," I might still be there today. And that was over 15 years ago, right?
Right.
You just don't know.
Right. Right.
So there, the company, the manager, the employee all have responsibility in this. And when everybody shows up and does the things that they need and can be doing, then you've got a recipe for success.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate, I love the pillars, first of all. So thank
Mm.
you for that. But here's the question. Managers very often struggle with their accountability in it because let's say, for
Mhm.
example, you sit down with your manager and your manager doesn't know the
Yeah.
either the questions to ask
Right.
or what you would be good at, or doesn't have any ideas about where you should go next, or
Right.
they struggle with being a conduit for your growth and success in that
Mhm.
way. And so what do you thought what do you tell managers to do,
Yeah.
particularly when they don't feel skilled or prepared to help
Yeah.
people navigate and figure out what to do next?
I honestly think from my experience running a lot of these leadership development workshops, talking with a lot of managers, I think the biggest challenge or problem for managers is that they think they need to have all the answers when it's not true. You don't
Mhm,
have to have all the answers, right? You just need to
mhm,
be a guide, a Sherpa, if you will, a connector, a quarterback, whatever metaphor you want to use, right? To bring people together and help them get to where they need to go or want to go. And what I'm hearing from clients out there in the corporate space is that a lot of managers are not having the conversation because they're afraid or
mhm.
they don't feel like they have the answer. They don't know what their people want. Well, I don't know what they want, so I'm not going to start that conversation. Or I don't have a promotion for them, so I'm not going to have that conversation, right? You don't have to have all the answers. If you truly want to be a great coach, being a great coach is about being curious and asking questions and listening, right? And
Mhm.
then providing guidance only when it's asked for. There's a great book called The Coaching Habit by Michael Bungay Stanier, who is a friend of mine. And in that book, he talks about the 5 questions to ask as a manager. And he talks a lot about being lazy to guide
Mhm.
you as a coach and a good manager. Stop trying to jump in and give advice and solve every problem. Just ask questions and listen,
Yep.
and dig a little bit deeper. And sometimes people can figure out solutions on their own, right? But
Yep.
it's really about being curious, being supportive, find out what people want, what they care about, and then providing the guidance, sometimes feedback, right, that is going to help them get to where they want to go. But it does require putting your ego and your own agenda aside to
Yeah.
really focus on your people and what they want. And of course, remember, like we've got a job to do, right? And you want to keep them accountable
Right.
to the job that they have now and the things they need to do. But what people want is they want trust, they
Yeah.
want guidance, they want accountability, they want to be challenged. They don't want to be micromanaged, by the way. That's the number one thing that managers do that people hate.
Yep.
And then it often happens because of fear. What if they don't do it the right way and it reflects poorly on me? I mean, you've got to trust people. You got to be willing to delegate to, but it goes back to like that career conversation is about just starting the conversation, just getting curious, asking questions. If you don't have you don't know what to ask, go get some guidance, right? The other
Yeah.
big problem is like managing is hard, and so many people are promoted into a manager role because they were good at the job they did before, but it
Right.
has nothing to do with their qualifications as a manager, right? So
Right.
companies need to provide training. And if your company doesn't provide it, go out and find a framework, like read that book, The Coaching Habit, find other books on, there's a great book called Multipliers by Liz Weissman that's
Oh
all
yeah.
about being a fantastic leader. I mean, if you just follow that and, use those two,
Yep.
then you're going to be successful as a leader.
Yeah. And I think as you talk, that I really sort of honed in on the idea that part of the fear is probably the labeling. So we're
Mm.
saying you got to be a coach, a guide, and that in particularly sitting in a hierarchy sounds like there is some answer that you're supposed to have. But you
Mhm.
really, it really goes back to what you're saying. Just show up and be curious and decide to be supportive. And you know more than you think you do. Just
Yeah,
just show up and listen and go,
right,
does that sound like a good idea? Have you
right.
met this person? You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
you will have more to offer than you're thinking, and maybe you're probably
right.
overthinking it in terms of
Think
what
about
you have to have.
there's a famous story about Henry Ford, who was, titan of industry, famous rich oligarch, right, in auto industry, and where he was testifying before Congress and they would ask him all these questions and he kept saying, I don't know. And they're like, how do you run this company if you don't know all these things? And he said, well, I have people who know these things. I just
Right.
delegate things to them. And it's
Right.
a good story to illustrate that you don't have to have all the answers as the manager. You just need to find the people that have the answers and bring them
Right.
together. And that's what I love to do, in a leadership capacity as well. Is like, I love to delegate stuff to people and find experts and let them do the work. I don't need to do the work. That's what's
Right.
beautiful about being a manager. So many
Yep.
people are trying to micromanage the whole process. And now you're being a manager and you're doing the job. What if everybody else
Right.
did the work and all you had to do was oversee it? It sounds, I mean, to me, that sounds great. I don't know about other people.
It is great if you can find the trust gene that allows you to do that.
Yeah.
That's exactly what you would want a manager to do. Um, what do you is there a common question that you get with people trying to manage your career? Like, what's the most common sort of pain point that shows up?
Yeah. So when I talk to people about owning their career, when I do keynotes and I talk about the first step, and first of all, the foundation I believe is in self awareness and understanding who you are, and then the first step is setting a clear vision for where you want to go in your career. I know this is where a lot of people get stuck because they're like, I don't know where I want to go in my career, especially
Mm,
if you're early, in your
yep,
20s and you're
yep,
still just trying to figure out the working world, and you're like, I'm not sure where I want to go. But even later on, people like we talked about, they just start working and things happen. One day turns into the next week, turns into the next month, and all of a sudden you're 15 years into your career, right? And you're like, oh, maybe I should try to figure out exactly where I want to go, because the more clarity you have on your vision for where you want to go, the easier it's going to be to make those tough decisions when they come up, right? Boss offers you a new opportunity or a promotion or a move to a different role. You get laid off and you got to decide what to do next. Your recruiter calls you, right? Your spouse takes a job in another city. Like, these things happen all the time. And
right.
oftentimes we're like frozen. We don't know what to do. But when you have a clear vision for where you want to go and a plan, it may not work out perfectly, but it will help you make those decisions, decide what to do. Now, the question that comes up, I think, most often is, well, how do I get that vision? How do I figure out what I want to
Mhm,
do? Right. And
mhm,
so here's the things that I normally tell people. Number one, it starts with self reflection. Something that most people, especially in the corporate world, rarely take time to do is
yep,
to sit down in a quiet space with a notebook and a pen and a cup of coffee or a cup of tea and spend at least half an hour just thinking and writing, no other distractions, right? No kids, no phone, no social media, right? And just write about, like, where are you in your career? How did you get here? What do you like about it? What do you not like about it? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Honestly, right? What do you really love doing? What are your energizers? What are your values? What are the things that you really care about?
mhm,
And where do you see this going? Like, where do you want to go in your career? If I could wave a magic wand, right? What is that career aspiration that you have? Within reason, right? Maybe you'd love to be an astronaut, but it might be not in the cards anymore, right? But like, maybe you want to be. Do you want to be vice president of finance one day, or do you want to maybe move into HR? Do you want to try marketing? What are you curious about? So that's the last thing is, a lot of times people are like, well, I don't know exactly what I want to do.
mhm,
So I ask, what are you curious about? What do you want to learn about? Because if you, Lisa, you and I talked, so we're talking before we started recording, you said you're sort of on the quote unquote back nine of your career, and maybe retirement is sort of on the horizon. But, for most people, especially if you're in 20s, 30s, 40s, you still got a while to work. What are you curious about? Like, you have time to pursue something. Go take a project role or a job in a certain area, try it for 2 years, and then decide, nah, this is not for me. I'm going to go in a different direction, right? That's fine. But you don't really know until you try it out and sort of set that vision and set that goal. And so I think a lot of people get tripped up there. But the key is to start moving towards some direction so that you are moving and you're
mhm,
not like stagnant or really drifting along. And then let that guide you and keep reflecting and recalibrating along the way, because things are going to change. That's okay. But I think the more we take ownership and the more clarity we have on where we're going, the more we feel we're in control, which leads to more fulfillment and happiness, which is what we talked about when we started this conversation.
yeah, yeah, and you've covered so well in your book, just sort of giving people sort of a step by step. You start with the first part of the book is really focused in on that self reflection, and then we get into sort of taking the steps. So the question I have is, you do the think tank, so you've got
Hmm.
the
Yeah, it's a
monthly
community,
gathering,
right?
the community. Who's a part of, like, how what's the audience of that community, and what are you all
Yeah.
talking about?
Yeah. So the Talent Development Think Tank is a membership community for learning and development professionals. I started it because back in 2019, my friend Bennett Phillips and I would go to these conferences, HR and talent development conferences, to learn and connect and network and find clients, quite frankly, right? And they were all so boring. Right? It was just like
Hmm.
death by PowerPoint, sage on the stage. And I'm looking around, I'm like, there's so much wisdom in the audience that we're not really getting to tap into. And so he and I decided to start our own conference called the Talent Development Think Tank, which we later named that. And it was designed to be all about experience, engagement, interacting, and really connecting with each other and learning from everybody in the room, not just
Hmm.
the speakers. And we did have some big name speakers. Josh Burson spoke on our stage. Liz Weissman, who wrote the book Multipliers that I mentioned,
Yeah.
spoke at our conference as well. As did Michael Bungay Stander, who wrote the book the Coaching Habit that I mentioned earlier, and several others. But most of the sessions, we had a lot of breakout sessions, and they were all experiential learning, interactive type sessions. And we ran that. It was 2 days. It was very successful. It was originally planned to be in November 2019, and then we had wildfires. Before we started recording, Lisa, you and I were speaking about climate change
Yeah.
in some ways. So the conference was planned for November 2019 in Sonoma, California, and there was a big wildfire called the Kincaid wildfire at the time that
Yeah.
actually came into town, and our hotel was evacuated 1 week before the conference. So we got to reschedule the conference, about 150 people coming. We ended up being able to reschedule it to January of 2020. Somehow miraculously kept all of our speakers, and
Wow.
most people who bought tickets were still able to come, plus some new people that weren't able to come to the first one. And the conference was a big hit. And the feedback we heard afterwards from so many people was this was the best conference that we've ever attended. And it was because we
Mhm.
made it so interactive, right? Where everything else is so like,
So,
lecture, sage on the stage, that kind of thing.
yep.
The food was also really, really good. Kudos to the hotel that we used.
Yeah.
Anyway, when we started selling tickets for the next one, but then obviously in March 2020, COVID hit and shut everything down. And I knew
Uh,
that we weren't going to be going to conferences for a while. So that's when I launched this membership community called the Talent Development Think Tank, which is a way to take it online. And very fortunate. I have a good network, and we had some founding members join back then. It's been growing ever since then. So the group is full of wonderful learning and development professionals from different industries around North America, a handful in Europe. And we talk about all things talent development. We have a live call every Wednesday. We bring in guest speakers. Lisa, I believe we have you scheduled to lead a session later this year.
yeah.
And so we talk about all things talent development, learning and development, leadership, DEI. And it's very interactive. It's very discussion based, right? Because I want it to be a community, not a lecture series, right? So
Right.
occasionally we'll have presentations, but for the most part, it's more of a discussion. We had one yesterday that was on trust and resilience in the workplace that was run by my friend Adam Piandis, who's been in the community for quite some time. And he went right into breakout rooms like within 5 minutes of the conversation. So it wasn't like, let me lecture you for 30 minutes while you take notes. It's like, no, let's have a conversation about what we're really dealing with and how different people address this. Because I think we can really learn from everybody else that's in the space. Everybody's got their own experience and perspective. And so that's what the community is all about.
That is awesome. Gosh, we've covered so much ground. I appreciate so much you taking us through. And so here's the big question. This is the question we
Mm,
ask every guest on Inputs to Action.
yep.
You have given us a ton of input around our careers and what not only what employees can do, but what employers can do. And certainly we've spent some time on managers as well. Given us great input. Now the question is, what action would
Mm.
you have us take?
Yeah. I love that you asked that because, I've got a part in my book about a chapter about bias for action, because I really believe that action in implementation is what separates successful people from others, right? Whatever your definition of success is, we live in a time where there is no shortage of information. You have access to any information you want. I mean, this is unprecedented. It's never been like this in the history of the world. If you want to learn how to do anything, you can find it on YouTube. You can buy a book for $17. You can take an online course for $1,000. You can get access to incredible information for not that much money, right? In the grand scheme of things. And yet most people don't do much with the information they have, right? I've been to big workshops and conferences. I've gone to see Tony Robbins, and he'll say, look, 90% of people here are not going to do anything with this, unfortunately, right? So I think what's allowed me to become successful and do a lot of things is just that I learn stuff and then I put it into action. Not everything, right? But so here's what you got to do. You got to take the things that really stick out for you, that are going to make a difference for you, and then not only write it down, but make a plan for how and when you are going to implement it. And if you're just trying to figure out, you're starting out trying to figure out, where do I want to go in my career? This idea of owning your career is novel or new to you, then the first most important thing you need to do is that self-reflection piece that I mentioned earlier, which is find a quiet space with a notebook and a cup of coffee. Do it tomorrow morning, right? Whatever time you normally get up. If you have work tomorrow and you normally get up at 7 to get ready and start work at 9, can you set your alarm and get up at 6 and make your coffee and say, I'm going to take this hour, hopefully before anyone else in my house gets up, if you have kids or whatever, and this quiet space, and I'm going to do what Andy said. I'm going to reflect on where I am, what are my strengths and weaknesses, my values, what am I excited about, where do I really want to go? And then at the end of that, I'm going to write down, what is the thing that I need to do right now to help move me in that direction. So if you said, I'd love to be director of marketing one day, I'm going to send an email today to the vice president of marketing and say, hey, can we have a coffee chat? I just want to ask you some questions about the group and like what I can learn. And I'm interested in, taking on this role at some point. I know I may not be ready yet, but I want to find out as much as I can and just start networking, towards that goal. But it's really about taking action. That is what, that's the big separator, right? Is just doing the thing. It's kind of like, I know you're very active in the DEI space, right? Lisa, there's a big difference between the companies that like to say that they are all about allyship and equality, and there's the companies that are actually out there taking action, having the conversations, putting programs in place, right? And they're going to reap the benefits as a result.
Yeah, no, I could not underscore it more, what you've offered to us. Taking action. You said self-reflect, get your coffee, get up, think about it, decide on something, and then take immediate action. I love that. Thank you, Andy. This was a great conversation, and I appreciate you joining. I appreciate the audience. I appreciate you joining Inputs to Action. I'm Dr. Lisa Tuppen. Thank you for your time. I'll see you next time.
See ya.
See ya.